Big
Call
Chairman's ready to
the
go.
subcommittee to order.
Wednesday.
And the first in the queue is Mr. Delig Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Tell us about your bill and why the Commonwealth can't survive without it.
Can't survive without it. Well, which one do you want to have two?
Take them in your order.
Start with the good one.
I'll start with the easy one. How about House Bill 1424?
That's not the easy one.
Like the other one? All right, I'll start with House Bill 76, which is the lower number two. We'll go in numerical order. So House Bill 76 is a sort of a Virginia Honest Ads Act sort of provision. What it would do is, the discussion we saw at the national level of the use of Facebook and Twitter and other websites and on digital platforms as an advertising platform, and then sort of bipartisan effort at the national level to create an Honest Ads Act. It had me call Meg and say, what do we do here in Virginia? Do we have a need for something like that? And in doing that research, we discovered that actually our Own Your Ad language that requires you to place the sort of disclaimer, this advertisement is paid for and authorized by, doesn't actually apply to digital advertising in Virginia. So what this bill does mostly, two things. It defines a digital platform, or an online platform, which is a public-facing website, application or digital application, including a social network and so forth. We actually don't want to capture every little thing, so this is, I'm open to changing this. It also defines it as a platform that has at least 50 million unique monthly US visitors. So it's aimed at the big guys, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so forth. And then says essentially that if you advertise on those platforms, you got to follow the same rules you do for print, for TV, for radio. So if it's audio, you've got to say at the end, this ad's been paid for and authorized by Delegate Marcus Simon, or whoever is paying for and authorizing it. Same thing with videos, and same thing with promoted posts, just like you would for an email or for a mailer.
Sure.
Yes.
Question. I mean, I've always assumed that was already the case, because I know, like on my webpage, that paid for and authorized by, and any of the, my campaign Facebook page, any of my posts, always had at the bottom, paid for and authorized by, and you're saying that's not the case now?
You didn't have to do it. I think most of us did it as sort of out of an abundance of caution. The rule was for your video advertisements for TV and radio, you had to, but when you look back at the code, it wasn't necessarily a requirement. The other thing that never really is captured, but this is maybe a little bit of new ground, is this idea of promoted posts, where you promote things for a fee. So if you sponsor a post, sometimes you see content that's sponsored and it looks organic. It looks like it's just somebody, you see a sort of fine little great writing that's sponsored, but it doesn't say by whom or who's paying to promote it or on whose behalf. So I think this language would get to that too. So if you've got a sponsored political ad, you've got to have somewhere in there who's paying for it and who's authorized sponsoring of the content.
To clarify, your website did require the disclosure, but if you put an ad on Facebook, it was not clear whether you needed to add a disclaimer on that.
Okay. Now, a follow-up question. All right, now, what about just the links? Like, on my regular Facebook page, I'll have a link to Mark Cole for delegate. I mean, the link itself, that doesn't need paid for and authorized by or anything like that, right?
Right, but if you were to go ahead and push out a post, right, say, hey, come over and sign up for my newsletter at Delegate Mark Cole for Delegate, and then, sponsor that so that it populated people's news feeds for a fee, you would add that, somewhere on that post, you'd have to say, paid for and authorized by, Cole for Delegate.
Delegate Simon, how, just trying to figure out, or we'll make sure we don't trap someone, and that is, how would you know if a platform has 50 million unique visitors?
Right, so, if you didn't want to be trapped, again, and I'm happy to, I've been thinking about this on line 52.
I like the bill.
But if we wanted to put a period to get rid of that, that limitation. I think the deal is,
Any platform?
was that just,
So that would be any platform?
would just be any public-facing website, web application, digital application, including a social network, ad network, or search engine that sells advertisements. And get rid of that number. I think that number just came from the federal statute. I just sent Meg the federal statute. I said, do something like this, and so she said, okay, and did something like that. Right, that way if you get somebody that turns out, you think you're on a small site, and it turns out that it does have 50 million, you wouldn't accidentally run afoul of the thing. frankly, a lot of what happens at state and local, you know, in places like Blue Virginia or Bacon's Rebellion and so forth, those may not have 50 million. I think the logic, you know, behind the rest of the bill would still apply to those smaller platforms.
Do you have any questions?
I actually really like the concept of this bill. Want to try to figure out the right way to do it. Why not just, so to me you got sort of three categories of ads. You've got traditionally what are print ads, traditionally what are radio ads but are just sound ads, and then you have video ads. So why not just amend the definition of print to include sort of a non-video audio online digital post, and put into the radio one, define it to include any online sound, and on the video one, on the television one, just any video post on any platform, including television. And then you're not trying to figure out, am I on a covered platform or not, and how do I handle this? You're just saying, if it's a video, here's what I do. If it's audio, here's what I do. If it's neither of those, but a still image of something, here's what I do. It would seem to me that compliance would be fairly easy then, in sort of standard and uniform. It wouldn't matter if you're going through Google Ads then, or some local placement service, you don't know where they're gonna put it, and that type of thing. And then we don't have to, I think we could avoid a bunch of the definitions that may become obsolete over time, that we just can't anticipate where technology might go. I mean, I never expected before the last presidential election that suddenly my Pandora would be overwhelmed with nothing but Barack Obama's voice. And so I think you probably have captured that with your digital application language. I actually wonder if we could make it easier and just apply the print standards to, you know, the Facebook ad type things, the TV standard to the YouTube and the videos, and the radio standard to the Pandora and things like that.
So, Mr. Chair and Delegate Habib, on lines 98 and 100, we attempted to do that
Yeah.
with the television advertising
Right.
requirements, and then the same
We did it with the other one too.
with radio. I think the issue with adding to the definition of television, which is what we would need to do to capture that video, that the definition of television is so specific to television broadcast station, and then if we ever moved away,
Sure.
so I think this was a simpler.
I think the question would be, should we change the definitions instead of being radio, print, and television to be video, audio, and something else, whatever we call print? And capture those categories, and then wherever you place them, who knows what the next medium's gonna be that we're gonna figure out how to use. Because it's ridiculous that I can spend, if I spend $1 to put something in a newspaper, I do something, but I spend $1 million putting something on Facebook, I don't have to disclose it's from me.
Right.
I do think promoted posts are complicated, because lots of people can promote a post, and you can argue, is it a political promoted post or something else? And that's sort of like needs the court, I don't mean to refer to courts committee, it needs that level of analysis where we go through every single anecdote of what could bite us that we aren't anticipating.
There was a comment, disclosure that the chairman, Cole, made this a subcommittee of the civil subcommittee.
Yeah.
I was looking at that, and then you got.
So if you don't want your bill being tinkered with, go somewhere else.
I mean, I think that question, the promoted post thing, requires some more thought. I mean, because you can have something, for example, that doesn't start out as a promoted post, it's just a post, and you go, oh, a lot of people are reading that, I'm gonna promote this. Like Servel promotes every post that he does, it's just his policy. He promotes his kids' soccer games. And I'm not trying to.
He's a great soccer player, I'd be very proud of him.
I understand that. And if it's making it more complicated, that I actually am thinking it makes it more simple. So if it turns out I'm wrong, it makes it more complicated, I don't know there's anything wrong with this approach.
So there's a budget committee, you want some, or?
Need a substitute. Let's go ahead and take testimony from the public if anybody came here to speak on this.
Is anyone here to speak in favor of the bill or opposition?
Okay, well, that makes it easy. Mr. Chairman, if I may, you know, I think we need to do this, but I think Delegate Habib's comments have some merit as well. So I'd ask that we take this by for the day, and Simon, you get with Habib, and Meg, you get with them, and work on it and see if y'all can come up with a easy way to do it.
We'll get there.
Okay. All right, without objection, the bill's going back. All right, what is the next?
House Bill 1424. And the inspiration for this bill actually came from Delegate Habib's Twitter feed. Back during the recent very close election, I noticed there was a conversation between Delegate Habib and some others about what the meaning of our recount statute was as it applied to drawing of lots. And there was a concern that we could sort of get ourselves stuck in an infinite loop where it appeared we might be able to, when in those cases where you've got a close election followed by a recount which results in an actual tie, then you have to go over to the drawing of lots statute that explains how we break ties. But in that statute, it said also, oh, by the way, the loser of a drawing by lots is entitled to a recount. It seemed to me, in looking at that the drawing of lots statute was separate from the recount. The idea was that if somebody was tied after the canvass, you have an election, you have a canvass, you look at your provisional ballots, you certify a result that says it's a dead heat, you would go to a drawing of lots. Well, just because you lost a drawing of lots instead of losing by 3 votes shouldn't bar you from the opportunity to have a recount, just like somebody who lost a very close election would be entitled to a recount. And so I think what we meant when we said the loser of the recount, of the drawing of lots gets a recount, would be if there hadn't been one already. And so what this bill attempts to accomplish is to take that, what I thought was the intent of the statute all along, and say it. It sort of follows the rule we use in real estate contracts a lot, which you deal with a lot of lay people, is sometimes you gotta say what you mean and then say you really meant it, and then say, no, really, this is what we meant to say. And so we say it in several different places in a couple different ways, starting with, line 25 of the bill, unless, so a person who loses the determination by lot may petition for a recount unless the determination by lot followed a recount, in which case the remedies that are left are the typical ones, which would be a contest pursuant to 24-2. It also says, you may be old, I don't know why we exempt governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. I just assumed you knew what you were doing.
The Constitution, thank you for the assumption. The Constitution provides for how we deal with a tie in those cases.
Gotcha, so we can't change that by statute. And then near the end of the bill, it just says again, if the contest following a recount, it says determination by lot, and it says they may not, it basically says you can't, you do one recount per election. You have to do multiple recounts.
Yep.
That's all that it does.
Any questions of the committee?
Got a couple questions or maybe comments.
Delegate Habib?
I mean, I think the problem we ran into in our inspiring Twitter conversations was that the lot casting section actually isn't in the recount section, it's in the election section.
Right.
And so there's a debate whether or not you even should be able to cast lots after a recount, or whether or not that just applies to the post-canvas tie, and you have to have a winner before someone can ask for a recount, so you have to draw lots to have a winner, and then you do it. So I think the whole section is totally confusing, and what we're doing is currently is reading the lot casting part out of the election section into the recount section, and then debating whether or not we should read the recount section into the recount section. And so I actually totally agree the section needs to be rewritten. I know there's some other bills also about not casting lots, but having a special election, and there's other ways that people are going about doing this. I don't know if this is the right way to do it. It is certainly one of the ways to get at the issue, which is currently totally confusing. So I don't, do we have a bunch of other bills trying to get at the same problem? Are they all on today?
Delegate Price has another bill addressing what we do when there's a tie after a recount.
And that's on
But that's a
today,
special
right?
election.
That calls for a
So it's
special
a different approach. I mean, you could technically do both, limit one recount per election, whether it's a tie or whether it's within the 0.5% or 1%, you get one recount. And then, technically you could say, even without prices, and say, in the case of a tie, you do a special election. Of course, then what if that special election ends in a tie? You get into an endless loop of special elections.
Yeah, I mean, so, Mr. Chairman, it seems to me like what the General Assembly's gonna have to do is have this bigger decision made that isn't necessarily represented in an individual bill, but what's the right way to handle elections? So if you have a tie after the canvass, what's the way to deal with that? What's the consequence then be, then if you have a tie, what should you do? And so what Delegate Simon is doing is addressing that one like for example, I don't believe a special election should be ordered because you're gonna disenfranchise for an entire General Assembly session, probably a whole district worth of people. But that's a legitimate argument to have. I'm not sure what the forum is to have that sort of broader conversation as opposed to just in one bill. I mean, I think clarifying whether or not you do or don't get a second recount makes sense. Whether or not this is the right answer or not is debatable, but we certainly should clarify it.
So we have, one more meeting between now and crossover, is that correct?
Yeah.
Two? Okay.
Yeah.
So one way we may be able to handle this is to hear testimony on those bills that deal with the recount or a tie.
Well, I think the two bills are different approaches. Just because they both deal with tie elections, it's two different things. Like I said, they're not mutually exclusive. So let's just deal with Simon's bill, and then we can go on to, the next one if Price is.
All right. Is there anyone in the audience, are there any more questions of the committee? Is anyone here to speak in favor of the bill?
If I understand this,
If you could stand up and state your name and.
yeah, my name is, Joseph McClung from Rich Creek, Virginia. This bill, as long as you have one, I mean, how often you gonna have a tie, drop, okay. And it shouldn't have all these recounts, and like you mentioned, you might have a double tie. And when you start having ties and recounts, all you're doing is causing the government, whether it's a state, local, federal, become more dysfunctional. Because you're not attending to the business you should be contending with. And so I think that you have one recount, and if it ends up in a tie, flip a coin or whatever, and move on.
That's the Simon approach.
I mean.
Good to hear what the public
Yeah.
thinks as opposed to
Yeah.
what lobbyists and
Yeah. Yeah.
legislators think. Thank you for coming
Yeah,
and
thank
telling us your opinion. Does anyone else like to speak in favor or against the bill? Another comment? But he operates by motion.
Mr. Sheriff, for me, I think it's, I like the idea of just saying, look, you get one recount. You don't get into endless recounts and things like that. So, now, do you have concerns about the language or anything?
I mean, we've got plenty of time to address them
Okay.
if the bill's gonna go forward.
All right, I move to report.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Can I just speak to it just real
Yes.
briefly? And yeah, so what I wanna do, and I do think, I agree this is not mutually exclusive with the Price bill, but I do think that we have to figure out a beginning to end how we're gonna handle these things. And so as she walks in right now, the question, I don't read them separate, so I actually, my inclination is to vote for your bill and not vote for her bill, because I don't want a subsequent special election. But some could argue that they should be read together and that should be the flow of it. I also think as a longer project, for staff, having the lot casting section in the election section, not in the recount section, where it could very well happen either way, after the canvas or there. I think it's probably a cleanup thing we need to look at. But no, I support the measure.
All right. Would you like to address?
There's one other thing, in the small local elections, where there's special election, you're more than likely to maybe have a tie.
Yep.
And so you might, will this apply there also? And if it does, I mean, you might, tee a bunch of people off, but say, well, it's your fault, you can come out and vote, And that's what it boils down to. I mean, 50% of the people who are eligible to vote don't even vote. And less than 50% of that votes. And so whoever gets 12.15% wins the election, okay. But what it is, if it applies to local, I think it should also apply to local elections and everything down. So I think it might encourage people to get out and vote. And that's basically what we do.
Okay. So, the committee had some additional discussion and that stir anyone else to want to address the bill in the audience?
If it reports, it'll be up tomorrow morning, full committee, so if you have anything to work out, you need to work it out tonight.
Okay. So we have a proper motion, it's been seconded. Anyone wishing to cast a vote on this bill, please do so with the electronic voting machine.
Having a good session.
So far.
Here, it's for you and Judy.
Right, so, is there a commissioner report, 5-0? 6-0. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alexander. Okay, next on the sign-up sheet is Delegate Sickles. There was.
We added it in the queue.
Okay,
so-
all right. Okay. Delegate Ransom. I believe there is a substitute in this bill,
Yes.
so we get that properly before us.
Move the adoption of substitute, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Any substitute before us?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. If I could explain the substitute.
Floor is yours.
The changes in the substitute is that it would change, the members of the board from 5 to 6 members. And then if I could just explain, what the bill does. So House Bill 1405, what this will do is make the State Board of Election truly bipartisan. It will, by enacting several key reforms, it increases the size of the board, where right now it's 3 members to 6 members. The governor will still make appointments to the board, but the appointments would be bipartisan. The governor would appoint 3 members of his political party and 3 members of the opposite political party. And after an initial staggering of the terms, board members will serve terms of 6 years. So this will provide continuity between gubernatorial administrations. And the board will appoint the commissioner rather than the governor. So that's a key item. If you look on lines 95 through 103, you'll also see where this, in my opinion, brings integrity and honesty to the position of the commissioner. We went through so much over the past few years. I think that the public, the registrars, the electoral boards throughout the Commonwealth really need something like this. And we just need to bring integrity back to the election process. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And I know that we have people in the audience that would like to speak on the bill. I'm happy to answer questions.
Did we adopt the substitute?
We did.
Okay.
Any questions from the committee? Does anyone on the audience wish to speak in favor of this bill? Okay, please stand up and state your name.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. Robin Lynn speaking on behalf of the Virginia Electoral Board Association fully endorses this bill, which is actually a bill that came out of a recommendation from the GRPD work group, which you know is chaired by former Lieutenant Governor John Hager, former Secretary of Commerce Kate Hanley. This will go a long way towards reforming a great many of the deficits that were unfortunately created in the last change of the state board in 2014. We wholeheartedly endorse it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Yes, my name is Barbara Tabb, and I'm on the electoral board in Prince George County. We desperately need this bill. I'm very much in favor of it. After the challenges we've had over the last few elections, the local electoral boards are desperate to support their registrars and get guidance and help from state boards. So please give us this assistance.
Yes, sir.
My name is Walt Latham. I'm the president of the Registrars Association, and we're very much in favor of this bill. We believe that it's important that the State Board of Elections be a larger body and that the commissioner respond to the State Board of Elections. Currently, there is, from what I understand, a lack of communication between the State Board and the Department of Elections, which, as you can imagine, imagine as a registrar and electoral board folks trying to conduct elections, pretty hard to do elections in uniform when the regulatory agency is not.
Anyone else?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Clara Wheeler, the current vice chair of the three-member state board. I cannot thank the committee that put this bill together enough, and I certainly cannot thank Delegate Ransom for bringing it in the form that you see it. I think this amendment to the bill to make it a six-member board and make the board truly a bipartisan bill is in keeping with the National Bipartisan Commission, which wants bipartisan boards. Other commonwealths, other states currently have either 4 or 6-member boards, and they work quite well because you have to have unity. And bipartisan seems to be a word we throw around fairly loosely until it comes to bipartisan. And this bill indeed does bring code-driven unanimity and bipartisanship, and it allows the board to act as a governing body by presenting the commissioner with duties and holding accountability. I cannot support this bill more strongly.
Yeah, I think we have a question.
Yeah, I had a question with Ms. Wheeler, and thanks for your service on the state board. Just so that we know, are you testifying on behalf of the state board or on your own behalf?
One of the reasons this bill is so important is that under the open meeting rules, which you all know, we have a 3-member board. We can't talk to each other
Right.
unless we're in a meeting. So I can't call up another member of the state board and say, hey, do you like this bill? Because we'd have to have a state board meeting to do
And so
that.
just to be clear, that's because if any two of you talk, that would be a quorum, and that would be a meeting that needed to have public notice, and so you literally can't even speak to each other
That's
with your current
correct.
organization.
So we cannot organize, we cannot exchange ideas before a meeting, which clearly you need to do, in order to be prompt in your responses. And this bill gives us the ability to have 2 or 3-member people talking to each other. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Charlie Judd. I'm speaking this morning as the past chairman of the previous Board of Elections. I concur with Dr. Wheeler's sentiment on the need for more than 3 board members. My experience was when I first joined the board that I couldn't even talk to the agency head because he was also a board member. And so we couldn't do anything until the gavel came down, and that really put some constraints on it. I've also felt that a 5-member board, because of the odd number, while I can appreciate the vice chairman of the current board's position on the bipartisan, I question the wisdom of that because how do you break a tie? And there will be ties, we all know that. And we as a result of a 6-member board, if it's 3 and 3, then you have a stalemate. And I can't resist saying that I think we've seen enough of that in the last couple of weeks. And so I would ask the committee, what's the provision for breaking a tie? In other states, there are even number boards. I know that state west of us that I'm familiar with, each locality has a 4-member board. The 5th member of that board is the elected Secretary of State. And so if there's a tie to be broken, that's how that happens. What's the provision for this one? And so that we wouldn't have that stalemate. The other value of this that I would say, and this has been a long time in the making. In fact, I don't know if you all remember, because a lot of the folks aren't here now, but in 2010, there was a bill very similar to this, 5-member board, et cetera, that passed the House 96-3. And then I hasten to say, I told Robin, half of those guys are here now. So, but the idea was good then, and the idea is good now. So, direct question is, how do we break a tie?
Delegate Ransom is going to address that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the idea behind the 6-member board is that they have to work together. They have to work together.
Chairman, I'd just say a tie vote fails. So it's like same as a 2 yay and 4 nay, or 2 yay and 3 nay. A 3-3 is a fail. You know, so.
Any other questions or remarks to that?
I want to speak to the bill at the appropriate time. I don't know if we have the audience.
Right. Anyone else wish to speak stand up, state your name.
Lynn Souter, City of Williamsburg, and this would be a tremendous help to the election community if you could help us out here. We've been struggling for the last, yes.
We're trying, thank you for coming. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
My concern would
Back-
be.
I'm sorry, but you
Judge
just state-
Joseph Bates from Rich Creek, Virginia, live 4-hour drive here. My concern is, will these members be members from different parts of the state? What I'm saying, I don't want them all to be from Richmond. I think if you're gonna have a sixth member, you should have somebody from, different areas of the state. And as far as tie-breaking thing, I guess you're referring to West Virginia, right? Yeah, they got some, as far as the tiebreaker concerned, it's like you're talking about the Secretary of State, you know, if he got a break, it's and naturally gonna go whatever political party he belongs to, it's gonna go that way, but, you know, it'd be nice to keep it bipartisan, but, you know, it's not. And so, do it his way, or let the Secretary of State do it, or something like that, but the main thing is if you have a six-member board, make sure you got people from different, areas of the state, you know, you may want to divide it into 6 different ways, whatever.
Nellie Ransom, I don't believe your bill provides for geographic appointments. Does anyone else wish to address the bill, for or against? Sir.
Dave Nichols, I'm the new Election Services Manager for the Department of Elections. We strongly oppose this bill, partly at least because it creates a situation where the governor is over an executive agency over which he has very little control of the day-to-day functions because the commissioner is appointed by the board rather than the governor.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak for or against the bill? Okay, any more? Delegate Landis.
Can I ask the gentleman from the Department of Elections a question? Sir, do you understand that the governor appoints these individuals to the Board of Elections?
I do.
So it's just like a Board of Visitors for a college or a university. The governor makes that appointment and they select the chief executive. What's the difference? That's worked very well in the Commonwealth of Virginia for over 100 years.
And I think that at this point, listening, being new and coming from West Virginia, actually doing election administration there, it gives me the ability to come in as a bit of an outsider and see things that are going on. And a lot, while I certainly appreciate the concerns of the GRs and the electoral board members, I think a lot of the problems that they've brought forward are more problems of personality than they are of process. I think there's certainly ways to work within the system as it is developed now to accomplish all of the goals that they're looking for. A larger board, may be of a help, but I don't know that there are ways I believe there are ways to work within the system as it's comprised now to be able to accomplish all the goals that they're looking for.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I also bring attention, to line 74 and 75 to the committee? Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the governor also will designate the chairman and the vice chairman of this board. So I'm confused about why the administration would be concerned.
Just speaking of the bill, I actually think this is one of the most important bills we have all year in the General Assembly. This makes real, legitimate, substantive fixes to a totally broken system. But in addition to that, it also will restore the perception of integrity in the system that is oftentimes just as important as the substantive value. There's nothing that is harder for one of us in this job than to represent people who don't believe in the integrity of the process. And so if they don't believe, and there's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle who have process-related bills, and if you listen to me on courts committee, hear me talk about process all the time, that if we lose integrity of the process, even if it's just a perceived loss of integrity of the process, then that drives down voter turnout, it raises cynicism, it does all the problems that we have. Now, it obviously is debatable whether or not this is the fix or part of the fix or whatever. Governors always oppose losing power. That's what they're supposed to do. There is a tiny reduction in gubernatorial power in this. So the governor gets to pick more people. The governor gets to pick the chairperson. The governor gets to pick the vice chairperson. The only difference is that the people he picks or she picks will then pick the director. I understand that. I understand why governors don't like giving up power. I have hope that this governor, having gone through all the elections he's gone through and having known this process, will actually see the integrity improvements that we've really seen sort of break down over the last 4 years or so. And I never heard from registrars in the past. And I hear from registrars every day now about how hard it is for them to interact up the food chain. And so I think this really gets at that. I think Mr. Judd raises a very legitimate question on is 5 or 6 the right number. Frankly, I think the very reason he raises is why I like the 6 idea, because with the 5, you can still just have 3 overwhelm the 2, and it still keeps the same partisan issues we've had. 6 forces us to move beyond that, which I think is good. I think the gentleman from Rich Creek, which is one of my favorite towns in Virginia, does raise an interesting question of, is there a way to either aspirationally or mandatorily drive regional representation? You could do it by congressional districts, by different ways you could do it, and I think it probably is something we should consider as this bill moves forward. If it moves forward, whether we should, lump the 5th, 6th, and 9th and make sure they get at least 1, and the 8th, 10th, and 11th to make sure they get at least 1, and there's different ways to do it. I think that's a good suggestion, is why it's great to have people here paying attention. But I think it's a great idea, and we did a couple years ago. We did like a CTB reform bill. They did a lot of the same stuff where we professionalized the Commonwealth Transportation Board. They no longer served at the governor's pleasure, but they were appointed and served out their time. And it has totally professionalized the way we handle transportation. And I think a couple election cycles into this, and we will totally professionalize and modernize the way we run elections. So I understand the short-term view of a current administration, but I hope that we'll take the long-term view of the best way to run elections and support this bill.
That would be Delegate Cole.
Yeah, I think, to address the regional issue, you could amend the bill so that, each commissioner has to be from a different congressional district or something like that. So I would, in concept, as it goes forward, Delegate Ransom, see if you could work with council and see if you could come up with an amendment for tomorrow morning's meeting to guarantee that, that 4 of them aren't from, we will. Well, 4 of them aren't from Northern Virginia or something like that.
At least we're sure.
We'll take a 757.
Delegate Land.
Mr. Chairman, I'd move that we recommend reporting House Bill 1405
As a substitute.
as a substitute.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those, would the members of the committee please cast their vote on the electronic voting machine. Okay.
4 to 2.
Bill is recommended for reporting on the vote of 4 to 2. Thank you, Delegate Ransom.
Thank you.
Okay, it's Delegate Boyce, you're up next.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So similarly, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I'm here with HB 272. And just like Marcus Simon, this also brings our registration process. This brings our registration process into the 21st century. Currently, right now, the only way registrars have to contact an applicant with a rejected application is through mail. This would enable, but not require, that they could use
email and or telephone, and they could take those, corrections over the phone. It would also, give them 5 days to do, to let the people know. In 2012, a total of 40,946 voter registration applications, or nearly 4%, were denied in our Commonwealth. That's a huge number. Asking for the applicant's phone number and email is not currently required. It would empower the local registrars but not require them to use email and phone as an additional method to notify the applicant about a denial of an application. And, all of us know that we use email and phone much more than we use snail mail. I've been working with a group of students over the past year from the George Mason Roosevelt Institute, which is a nonpartisan student-run think tank focused on drafting and implementing policy proposals at the state and local level. And this idea was brought to me by Danielle Melton from George Mason University. She is here today. We know that there has been a huge increase in applications during the month from September to October, making it more important that the registrars get the information out in a reasonable amount of time. And many of the people who get those notifications, maybe they're away on work and they have no way of checking their home mail. Maybe they are computer illiterate or don't have access to email. They might be out of the country and not have normal access to the portal that is available. And I think this is an easy and reasonable common sense fix. And I hope it's the pleasure of the body to be with the bill.
Okay, thank you. Just for the committee's information, I believe Delegate Reed has a similar bill.
Yes, sir.
And so, we'll probably just use one bill as a vehicle, but Delegate Reed, if you want to chime in at some point in time, we'll let you, do so. Also met with the students from George Mason. It was a pleasure to see that you're all here. I look forward to hearing from you. I have one comment, and that is that, I believe there should be a mechanism for the voter to designate how they wish to receive notice. Just my personal observations. Does anyone else on this committee have?
One question, maybe something. What's the current process? So if I file an application and it gets denied, what do they do?
They send you a letter in the mail.
Okay. And is that in your, is that
That's
code
still
section in the, but is that in the bill? I'm just trying to read through sort of the way it works. Is that in the appeal section or where is that?
Let's see. It's 24.2-422 appeal.
Yeah, so is this in line 77, which just says general registrar sends a new application?
Yeah, this says line 74, part B, within 5 days after the denial of an application, the general registrar shall notify the applicant of the denial. Notice may be made by all available means, may be made, not required, including telephonic notice and email notice.
You're talking about the language you're adding in.
That's the language I'm adding in.
Right, I'm saying, where's the language in the
current
current law that says, maybe Magnus?
The next line down, line 77,
Yeah.
what you.
So what I was reading is so they don't, the only thing they are required to do by statute is just send a new application by mail, right?
Correct.
So the Mr. Chairman, following, I'm not sure if it'll have a question mark on the end, or if it'll have a period on the end. You never know when I start talking. Another good idea. One of the issues we've had a lot on commerce and labor is, as we modernize our ways of communicating, do we modernize the way government communicates with citizens? And whether that's service of process or notice or insurance notices, we deal with a lot and that type of thing. And there's always a lot of concern when it comes to email, that email accounts that receive the first email from a government account may end up in spam filters and not get caught. And we have that a lot. That's a big issue in the insurance claims issue. And so the question would be, could we accidentally, by eliminating the automatic mailing,
We're not eliminating.
okay, so you're still having the automatic mailing and some other kind of notice. And that may get into where the designation would be, that if it ends up in the spam filter, arguably it's kind of their fault because that's the method they chose. That might make that even more important to do something like that. Because I think the 10 days is the right window for what it's worth as opposed to the 5 days. But I think a notice beyond just sticking something in the mail because they might be on vacation or whatever does have a lot of value, as long as we're sensitive to how that gets to them.
Sure, and Mr. Chairman, may I just add, so no one is required to give their email or their phone number, that's purely voluntarily done, and you would allow them to give it, it's not a prescription, so.
So what I would say would be they can provide the information, and then the registrar would contact them through their designated method, as opposed to all allowable methods or whatever. I mean, that could be like a Facebook message or a Twitter direct message or something like that. And, and we talk about commerce and labor and in court, should you be able to serve via Facebook? There are some states that have begun moving in that direction, where you can serve process electronically through any means. And arguably that would be service in Virginia, because receipt is service in Virginia. So rather than saying all allowable methods, I would say by the method designated by the registrant or the voter, whatever word we use.
Any other questions?
It's just a real quick question in regards to the letter that says, is it only the new application, or does it also explain causation of why it was denied?
It would tell you why you were denied, and this bill would let you make a phone call and tell them, so you wouldn't have to mail it.
Okay, thank you.
And then you could take that information while you're on the phone with them to correct the error. So a lot of times it's just you forgot to include your middle initial, or you misspelled something wrong, and that gets thrown out. And this would help the registrars.
No, Nicole.
Yeah, see, it's that provision I have a concern about.
Okay.
Cause you don't know who's really on the other end. But anyways, I'd like to hear from the registrars if they have issues with
Okay,
that or not.
and I would just say, you don't know who's on the other end when you get your mail in your house. I mean, it could be.
Yeah, but when you have a letter, you have a tangible thing. If there's a court dispute, you could say, well, this is the letter we got, Judge.
I hear you.
Okay. Any other questions of the committee? Okay. Anyone in the audience wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Hi, my name is Danielle Melton. I'm a student from George Mason University and a member of the Roosevelt Institute, and I came down this morning to testify in favor of HB 272, which would create a requirement that registrar notify denied applicants within 5 days of their form being rejected. It would also allow registrars to contact them through email or phone. So this is important because there are certain populations that right now could maybe not receive their application denial notice through mail. So if your address is misspelled or it's not completed, they wouldn't have an address to send to, which could be quite common with elderly voters or people who have problems with English. Rural voters like those from my hometown often have PO boxes or issues with receiving mail on time, and they're checked infrequently. So you might not receive it within time to re-register. Military voters often can't receive mail when they're abroad, or they don't rely on mail for rapid communication. This bill came out of some of my experiences serving as an election officer, a recount officer, and serving as a nonpartisan voter registration volunteer for a couple years. So I've seen several people come on voting day and think that they're registered because they were still expecting their voter card in the mail and they never got it, or they didn't get their notification of denial in time, or they didn't get it before the deadline to re-register. So in Virginia in 2016, 750,000 voters registered to vote in the 2 weeks before the voter registration deadline. That's a lot of people. To me, the 5 days is what we need to make sure that people can register in time to re-vote. And as for the question about correcting things on the form, you could modify it to say non-material changes. So something like the middle initial, which in some areas could get you denied. It's based on the registrar, from my understanding, or apartment number. So if the address is correct, but that's not a mailing address, they don't have the apartment number, that could be something that could be fixed on the phone.
Commend you for coming to speak. I wouldn't be surprised if you're not in one of our seats one day.
You can have mine.
Don't say that too loud. You might get emotional now.
I'm out.
I'm a second.
Okay, anyone else in the audience like to wish to speak in favor of this? All this is being recorded by somebody.
Against Rich Creek, Virginia, My question is, I think you stated like, what, 4,000 people, 4% of people was denied, right? Question is, why were they denied? Second question is, how many of those 4,000 actually voted? Or tried to vote, or whatever. And so I'm looking at the number, because if these people here, how many of these people actually knew in advance that they would, let's say they can fail? And how many of these people already knew in advance that they'd probably be denied vote? I'm in favor of it, but it's like that just like to notice how many of these 4,000 people did vote, or they already knew that they couldn't vote.
All right, so would you like to respond to that?
Would you like me to answer? Well, you know, if their voter registration was denied, they were not allowed to vote.
Right.
A lot of them showed up thinking that everything had been set. So a lot of these are college students who are first-time voters, perhaps, people who might have moved into the state, didn't do everything right. But if their voter registration was denied and they didn't realize it, they would not have had an opportunity to vote at all. So,
Okay, yeah.
leaving them disenfranchised.
Okay.
And
The statistic is people who are denied for any
Okay, so
reason.
we want to try to follow the proper procedure here. So first, were you finished with your remarks?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Delegate Boysko, will you finish with your remarks?
Yes,
Okay,
Chairman.
all right. Delegate Reed, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One specific example that was related to me was really, it dealt with a specific college student who had registered, thought that she was going to be able to go vote, and then did not find out that she was not able to vote until she actually showed up at the polls, because this particular individual was coming home to vote and coming back from college, and the parents had gotten the mail back from the registrar and had just not opened her personal mail, because she's an adult, and just left all of the stuff packed up there. Yeah, left everything stacked up there on the table for her, and then she found out that she wasn't able to vote after she went to the polls.
Okay, so we probably need to move the meeting along. We're getting close to a time where we may not be able to hear some bills. So was there anyone else who wanted to speak in favor or against the bill who has not yet spoken?
Well, Latham, President of the Registrars Association, I can say that personally I like the idea behind the bill, but the concerns I have to bring forward on behalf of the association and the membership is that it's an example of where our desires exceed what the state and the localities have provided in expenditures to do the job. You have some offices where they're just one or two full-time people in busy elections and trying to track how this person wants it and that person wants it, as well as making sure that they got it, or the fact that they still might not have received it. It puts us in more of a responsibility of trying to manage flow when we frankly barely holding our head above water as it is. And that's the problem that is the tune we've been singing to for all these many years that I've been coming here. And so it's unfortunately one of those situations where the expenditures are not there to provide for our wishes.
The last one is an unfunded mandate.
I will let you characterize it.
Lynn Souter, City of Williamsburg. I have a two-person office, me and my assistant, and we have an area in the backyard. These students have registrations given to them as they're on their way to class. We can't even read them half the time. For us to have to sit and try to call 150 kids or students at one time, it's impossible for us to do. I don't know, I would be happy to do it if I had the money to hire some people in my office. I can't imagine going through an application saying, how do they want me to call them or notify them? we send out, we are very diligent, and they get their mail within 5 days before then. It's usually the next day, because we'll stay at night and get them out, the letters out. Now, if they've given us a wrong address, or they don't know where they live, at some point, the college students have to take responsibility for their registration and filling in the forms. To put that burden on the registrar's offices, I don't think it's feasible. I don't think we can even do it unless, I mean, I envision phone banks in my office or something. It's just not gonna work. It might work in rural communities where they don't have students, but in the college towns, it would be next to impossible, I think.
Anyone else who's not already addressed the bill? Okay. Right. I'm sorry, you wanted to say something else, if you could be very, very quick with it and not redundant.
I just wanted to address some of the questions. Before, the statistic that she mentioned was only people who were denied for incomplete filling out of the application. And as for the burden being too high, there are automated email and phone systems just to say, like, this is our number, please call us back, you were denied. And also it's permissive, so if the registrar in Fairfax City says that they want to deny students from George Mason by email because they know we don't have a good mailing system, that would be his choice. I don't think it's a requirement for an undue burden on some of these registrars.
Thank you.
All right. I've just got one question. I'm being told this is permissive. I'm looking at my summary and it's saying required, so I just wanna know so that I know which one.
Well, as a lawyer, Adelia Lindsay, you know what's in the bill is what governs, so.
May I?
There are some shall and some mays. They shall do it, but they may use whatever method.
Okay, great, Adelia, what's good?
So I'd just like to point out, no one is required and no application would be denied if you did not have the telephone number and email address. This is something that the registrars have the ability to add on. They're not being required in my bill. Secondly, what Danielle mentioned was there are automated opportunities to do an email that just says, your request has been denied, you need to reach out to us. You can do that by phone, an auto phone dialer as well, which is very inexpensive and would not require an individual to make individual phone calls to each and every person. So I believe that we have the technology. I believe this can bring us into the 21st century. I understand it seems scary for people to change, but I think we can make this happen. And again, it is permissive, it is not required, which gives localities in more rural areas where they don't have resources the opportunity not to take advantage of this.
Okay, so I think this is where we are. I think there's some people in the committee who would like to see a few tweaks to the language. In particular, the voter indicating their preferred method of contact. The number of days seems to be a bit of an issue. There's some mays and some shalls that folks might want to take a look at. I don't think we have time to propose all the amendments today and get it just how we want it to be in form. But that's just my thought.
I'll make comment to it. So I'm really sensitive to the local registrar, especially the college towns. I'm in Salem. We have Roanoke College. That's become a big issue in Radford. It's a huge issue in Montgomery County. And what we're seeing is sort of this mass collection of new applications of college kids with voter registration drives and stuff. So I think this is a legitimate concern. The thing that I'm concerned about, and it goes to Delegate Lindsay's question, we just had an election in Newport News that was a tie. My understanding is there was something like 6 or 9 CNU students who believe they were registered, who weren't registered, who showed up to vote, voted provisionally, whose ballots were rejected because they weren't actually registered. This gets at trying to solve that problem, but what I think it does is creates litigation and a basis for a contest that doesn't currently exist, because not only are you gonna have to determine whether or not those people were valid voters in the moment, you have to determine whether or not they should have been allowed to vote there. You're also gonna question whether or not the registrar met the standards of this statute. And if somebody says, well, I was registered, but I never got the email, can you prove you sent it? And if you didn't, then you've disenfranchised me, and I was literally the tie-breaking vote in the House of Delegates race. I think we're gonna have a huge issue with contest and litigation as this is currently drafted. So that, I would have real concerns. I went into this fully expecting to support one of these two bills with a 10-day window. I don't think I can support advancing this legislation as it currently is. While I'm totally on board with the concept of wanting citizens to have notice from their government.
You know, I have a motion. I move that we lay both bills on the table, that way they're still alive. If y'all can work on to address some of the concerns, either the registrars or Delegate Habib, we could bring it back at our last meeting, but unless those issues are addressed, they would remain on the table. So I move that we lay the bills on the table.
Okay, so the only bill before us right this minute is Delegate Boysko's, so we'll deal with that one first. And so there's a motion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all right, so can we,
It won't show,
Okay.
because I don't have it set up.
okay, but we can, okay, so you have, theoretically, or somehow pulled the other one up. We're voting on, both bills, and so just be.
356.
All right,
272 and 356.
So just to be clear, Delegate Cole, your motion is to lay House Bill 272 and House Bill 356 on the table.
Correct.
And
Second.
And that was seconded by Delegate Habib. All right, all those in favor, please cast your vote on the, or all those who wish to cast a vote on that motion, please do so in the electronic voting machine.
Chairman call the vote?
All right. Okay, so the motion carries on a vote of 3-2, with the caveat that I think those who voted in favor of it would like to see it come back in another form.
That's right. Thank you for your consideration.
All right.
Nobody has a committee meeting at 8:30 here, do you? Don't have a committee meeting at 8:30.
It's supposed to be my budget briefing.
Let's keep rolling unless as long as the minority caucus leader doesn't object to us treading on committee time.
Delegate Sickles, they told us to put you at the very end. I don't know who that was. Was it,
I got a
your
sense
legislative
of-
aide? But, we'll call you now.
Okay,
If you wanna
I'm free until 9 o'clock, if that helps, but hopefully this won't take but a little bit.
Just let the record reflect we were nice to you.
Thank you. Well, mark it down, for this is a historic nature. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, what I'm bringing for you today is just a change to, because it's 2018 and we should have maps that reflect the districts that voters actually live in. You might have read the recent Washington Post article. They had 3 researchers look at our districts and found that 6,000 registered voters were mistakenly placed in the wrong House district. Expert suggesting these mistakes could have affected others. Obviously, it had a big effect in one district. Under current law, our Department of Elections has no responsibility to ensure that voters are correctly assigned. We have, under current law, a requirement to send, when the localities draw the precincts, they are required to send over, quote, reapportionment ordinances that they pass, which include, quote, a description of a map of the boundaries. So the issue with just requiring a reapportionment ordinance is that they are static snapshots of the area. They do not provide the level of data required to accurately place voters in some of these split precincts. We have many split precincts, and we have convoluted district lines for various reasons. And so I think we need to improve this. Most of the localities have GIS, if not all. The language is I believe, takes into account, Meg, you can say the localities that may not have it yet, but it's pretty universal.
universal now. I mean, if you're, it's, oh, so I'm sorry, it's a line amendment we got coming. So my staff has worked with advocates, the public, and some registrars, I think, to look at this bill, and we have changed a few line amendments to make it acceptable to folks. But the point of it is that the final say would be with the Department of Elections as to blessing the map being accurate, which we don't have now. It might require another staff person at the Department of Elections. So I do have a budget amendment for one FTE. It's just a placeholder if the committee wants to do this. I'm not actually sure it's needed. I just did that for just to be careful if you asked about that we would have a budget amendment in place to have a staffer make sure that all of our district lines are correctly drawn, and so the public can go and walk up and look at a map, see where their house is, know where they're supposed to be, and associate that with the ballot they get. So we just passed out of this other subcommittee, the chairman's bill, what we do when a voter thinks that they've been given the wrong ballot. It's a good bill. We voted for it, I think, unanimously. I'm hoping with this bill that situation doesn't occur. So that's what this is all about.
Okay, any questions from the patron?
Oh, I'd like to hear the amendments.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So on line, beginning of line 29, at the end of line 29, or beginning of line 30, we will insert any county, city, or town that does not have GIS capabilities may request the Department of Elections to create on its behalf a GIS map showing the boundaries of the districts or wards as set out in the ordinance, and the Department of Elections shall create such a map. And then at the beginning of line 48, we will insert any county, city, or town that does not have GIS capabilities may request the Department of Elections to create on its behalf a GIS map showing the boundaries of the new districts or precincts, and the Department of Elections shall create such a map.
Okay.
A question on that. I think probably most of our counties and cities probably have GIS at this point, but we probably have some towns like Rich Creek that may not have GIS. So, and they would probably rely on the county that overlays them for the most part for the GIS data. So does the department have the capabilities to do GIS work on behalf of these small towns?
I think that some of them may not, and that's why this is one thing we can do that in this committee, which we do unfunded mandates. Everything we do is an unfunded mandate almost, is for the state to actually pick up this role.
What I was asking was, I think there are some that don't. I mean, I think that there are lots of towns that don't have, certainly they don't have GIS. They may have a county overlaying GIS, they don't have their own. The question I'm asking is, does the Department of Elections have the capacity to do GIS analysis and create maps and do the data for these little towns, is what I'm asking. I just don't know if that's something they did.
I don't think they do, actually, but we could ask.
They're all waving at
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Dave Nichols, Department of Elections. We don't currently have that capability, but our fiscal impact statement does indicate we would need one full-time employee and about $255,000 to be able to get all the licensing and software necessary to be able to accomplish those goals.
Definitely
If
be
this goes
appropriations.
forward, it would have to go up to.
Sure, I know, okay.
I think we got some more people who want to answer that question back there.
Oh, which question about the department?
About the capabilities of the Department of Elections.
I'm sure he's got some thoughts about the capabilities of the Department of Elections.
I don't, well, I just wanna say with regard.
Just to that, Delta Beeb's question.
Not to that specific question.
We'll get to it.
Okay.
I mean, I think if you're gonna do GIS, everybody's gonna have to have GIS. It's gotta come from somewhere. Some people don't have it. If there's not already a state agency that can do it within its budget, we're gonna have to create it. I mean, that's.
I would think there's gotta be a state agency somewhere that has GIS, and so the department wouldn't necessarily have to create their own, they just ask for it from another agency.
I'm on the Virginia Information Network Advisory Council. I think I got that right. And they are in the process of remapping everything in the Commonwealth down to like 2 feet. And so the Commonwealth does have that information election somewhere, but we all know that a lot of times left-handed talks to right-handed, so the logistics of that, I think, gets to the budget amendment. How do we get that information from one agency to another and having someone process it in the format that localities and towns get? So that's, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Robin Lynn speaking on behalf of the Virginia Electoral Board Association. I think I'm correct in saying that at the time the State Board of Elections considered the tiebreaker vote, the Department of Elections turned to somebody and came back with a GIS for the disputed districts. So the technology exists, the agency exists, the department can produce it. But in the statement from the commissioner, he said, we do not have the funding, we do not have the mandate, we do not have the responsibility, and do not have the duty to do this. I think that the delegates' bill would change that and have the state assume the responsibility for this to help those localities that do not have it. And I could also say that in my particular locality, in Goochland County, the supervisors in their wisdom have never agreed on the surveyed line between Lewis County and Goochland or Fluvanna and Goochland. So we don't know.
Those guys go back a couple hundred years.
Okay, so we're getting kind of.
Yeah, well, let's adopt the amendments
Yeah,
first.
okay, can we get the amendments before us?
I move the amendments.
Second.
All right, any discussion on the amendments? Discuss a non-debatable motion. So all those in favor of the adopting amendments, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Amendments are before us. All right, any additional questions by the committee of Delegate Sickles? Delegate Cole?
Yeah, now, is this, I mean, other than providing GIS maps, does this bill give any new authority to the Department of Elections that they don't currently have?
It gives them more responsibility,
'Cause
a little bit more responsibility. Most of Virginia, the locality will be able to handle this,
Yeah.
and it'll be just a check. So it would be mainly for places that don't have it. But my staff just reminded me that the Department of Legislative Services has this software, because that's how we do redistricting. We have pretty sophisticated software here. So I think there may be
So
some.
you could provide it to the Department of Elections?
So there may be some coordination that's required here, but this is left out there right now, kind of in a hazy situation with finger pointing, who's responsible for what. That's what this bill is intended to straighten out, and it may need some more work to completely do that. And I think that if we can do that in the Appropriations Committee, because, I mean, Appropriations Committee won't fund this person in this effort unless we know what we're doing with it.
Delegate B.
Part of the reason you have this bill is why I supported the bill regarding the State Board of Elections becoming more professional, nonpartisan, bipartisan, because that whole finger pointing thing is the lack of integrity that people perceive in the process. And when they don't trust the process and then they get handed the wrong ballot, they're convinced there's a mass conspiracy to disenfranchise them. So I actually like the concept of what you're trying to do. I do think it's probably need more work. I did have a question about a sentence. On line 18 and 19, the department shall direct any corrections to be made if necessary. What does that mean and how would that happen?
How would that happen? I think that's straightforward, but so if they get a map from a locality that is incorrect, I think their responsibility would be under this provision to make the correction, and, you know.
And so what I'm trying to figure out is, are they just going into the state voter database and changing where they vote? Are they going back to the locality and saying you need to change your ordinance because you got your lines drawn wrong? Can they compel localities to do that?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Habib, the sentence above it, the department shall promptly review the ordinance and map and compare the boundaries contained within and with the information in the voter registration system in order to ensure that voters have been assigned to the correct district. So
Yep.
they're reviewing the district assignments.
Right.
And then if there are corrections that need to be made to the district assignment. So if you've been assigned to the wrong district, they would say, hey, changing that in
Right.
Veritas.
Well, Mr. Chairman, what I'm getting at is, and you heard, I mean, going back hundreds of years, we have localities who fight about where a line is. So let's say two localities' ordinances show up with the GIS data and they overlay each other where they claim this and they claim the same thing. And the department goes, this voter is in the wrong spot. is what that means, they just go into the database and change them? Does it mean they're supposed to call the localities up and work with them to try to resolve the border dispute? Does it mean they direct a new ordinance to be done? I just wanna know what they will literally do when that moment happens, cause it's gonna happen. 6,000 plus people, I bet it's more than that, have some uncertainty as to where they actually are. I mean, really, if we could make this all state centralized, and the state just said, you vote when we tell you to vote, and we're gonna take all this data, and then we run the database, you could undo the uncertainty, but it would also take away some of the control of the localities. That's just a practical question. I think you're gonna get to a position where the department goes, all right, time to direct corrections, and they go, I know what we're supposed to do.
So I think we could do some clarifying amendments based on what you want them to be able to direct corrections regarding.
Well, I mean, Mr. Chairman, they clearly can't force a locality to pass a new ordinance. They can't resolve border disputes. They, I suppose, could go into the voter database and just say, notwithstanding what we just got in the ordinance, we're sticking you here, not there. If you're gonna do that, you really better pass the other bill, the ransom bill, because if that department is as political as it is now and is gonna have unilateral power to move voters around, you're gonna have a real problem with voter integrity at that point.
The department could direct the locality or the electoral board or the general registrar to make corrections to the registration system if necessary. The concern is the who and the what.
Yeah, and can a registrar do something inconsistent with the ordinance of the locality that they're relying on?
Problem duly noted. Delegate Lindsay, do you have a question or comment?
I don't have a question, I just think this is the appropriate time for the motion. I move to report and refer it to appropriations.
We haven't heard from the public yet.
Oh, we haven't?
No.
I thought we were, I'm sorry.
No, well, there was some engagement with the public about this particular question Delegate Beebe had, but we've not heard from everybody in the audience, so don't think we're at that.
I'm not trying to jack
I'm
it up,
sorry.
but it's one else.
There's good points that were made, and, like a lot of this stuff, we're moving real fast, it's early in the morning, and, I think that what your concerns can be addressed, I really do, I mean, and they should be addressed, so,
And especially if the two bills are working in tandem.
Yeah, but you're gonna vote against that one, he's gonna veto it.
Not if this one goes through.
Oh,
It's
crap.
called bipartisan cooperation.
Just make a deal. All right, enough editorials right now. Anyone in the audience wishes to speak in favor
No
of
way
the
you
bill?
can give the department some kind of vague authority to move.
Start walking forward and sit down.
It's not gonna veto the other bill,
Yes, sir.
there's gonna be more.
Joe Blunt, Richford, Virginia. I'm in favor of this bill, but I'm gonna tell you a circumstance in Giles County. On Powell's Mountain, if you live on if you're going up the mountain, if you live on the left-hand side of the road, you go to Glenland and vote, which is 2 or 3 miles down the road. You drive by the voting places at Rich Creek. If you live on the left side of the road, you go to Rich Creek. So you gotta drive by one voting booth to go on down the road to another one. That, and this, what you're talking about here, but you're talking about overlapping everything, that really disenfranchises people from voting. So why should I, just because I live on the wrong side of the street, I gotta drive extra 2 miles to vote? And, you know, it should make voting easier for people. Not hinder them.
my bill didn't address that.
And, you know,
That's
I
another
like
problem.
this bill, but, you know, I see his overlapping part big time.
They hit the.
It's another problem that we also have to deal with.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else like to speak in favor of the bill?
Clever Wheeler, Vice Chair of the State Board, and I unfortunately was in the middle of the problem in the 28th and the 88th district when this came to be. And my question to the then Commissioner of Elections was, because the State Board of Elections, which goes back to the previous bill, had no knowledge of the district line drawing inadequacies, and I use that term to be kind. I asked the commissioner, when did you know that there were problems with the district populations? And his response was, very clearly, before the congressional elections 2 years ago. And my response was, and what did you do about it? I didn't do anything, it's not my job. Now, he's not here to, so I guess you have to take my word that that was a conversation, but it was. This bill requires that the localities look at their population and how their districts are populated. It requires that they do it with the GIS maps, with the LIS overlays, and there is a companion bill, which you probably know, in the Senate that requests the same thing. I think this is extraordinarily important. I would add and offer consideration for a dream with a deadline. I think this needs to be done with a deadline. And I think the report from the localities needs to come back to both the Department of Elections and to the State Board of Elections, so there is oversight to make sure that it gets done in a timely fashion. Again, to give the voters confidence and to make it right. So I think those are two things. To answer the previous question, the Department of Elections had the capability of looking at the LIS maps when this discussion came up before the state board was asked and should have certified the elections. They produced maps and they had them done, so they have the ability to get them. I think this is imperative that we make right the populations of our districts before we even consider redistricting. If you don't have it right to begin with, you don't know what to do going forward. So I think we've got to do this with a deadline and with a report, and possibly you might want to charge the state board with reviewing. And it's a monumental task, but it has to be done by the localities, because the localities know the people. They know the side of the mountain. They know where their precincts are, etc. This is bottom up, not top down. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak in favor of the bill? Those opposed?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my colleague runs with Virginia Municipal League. We do appreciate Delegate Sickles allowing for the state to step in for the smaller localities that are our members that would help pick up that can't afford GIS to come in and supply the maps for.
So you're in favor of the amendment?
Walt Latham, President of the Registrars Association. At the beginning, I think I heard Delegate Sickles say he wasn't sure if this bill was needed, and I think something like this is needed. I know when I did redistricting back in 2011, it was my first redistricting. Part of what we did was we did a GIS review before and then after, and there are very funky things you find when you start doing a GIS analysis, such as people registered at houses that don't exist according to GIS. And then when you get there, you find out that they do exist. It's just the parsonage decided they wanted their mail delivered to the parsonage and not to the main church, so they just gave their house a number. It's that kind of detail that gives me a little bit of concern about a state level analysis. I've spoken with Delegate Sickles' office. It's my understanding they could be using local maps. That would help my concerns a bit. When we had the redistricting back in 2011, the maps that we got, when we were looking at the online maps, the county line was not correct. When I was looking at a house on the Pocosin York County line, the Pocosin registrar and I had a very vigorous conversation about whether the house on that side of the swamp belonged in Pocosin or York County. And I was told by county staff that no one's really sure where the Pocosin York County line is. It's that kind of concern that it's confusing enough at the county and city level when you're dealing with it. And when you go to a state level, I'm concerned that, especially if they're telling you fix it, it's like, that's great. It's something that I can't fix. And so that's my only concern, but I do agree something like this is needed. One of the bills we did like in the association when we were talking yesterday was SB 913, which is Senator Chase's bill, I think newly filed. But something like this would be great, because not all counties and cities have the ability I had to do a GIS analysis. My main concern is just having the state dictate and look at lines when they may not actually reflect the reality we're looking at on the ground. And I did just want to say I appreciated all that Mr. Austin has done. He is, when you ask if the state has GIS, you have living GIS.
Do you have an amendment to that?
We would rewrite the last sentence that you all flagged on line 18 and 19 to say that the department shall notify the locality of any corrections that may be necessary. They would still be reviewing, but they wouldn't be actually directing.
So it'd be up to the locality to decide whether or not to act.
It's actually needed or not based on what they know in their locality.
Okay, let's get that amendment before
I
us.
move the amendment.
Second.
All right, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The amendment How are we doing on time?
It's almost 9 o'clock.
We've got quite a few. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to address this bill or the amendments, and provide comment that has not already been made by someone else? Okay, all right. So,
You'll love it when Republican wins next governor's election.
all right. So, as I understand this, I feel like the committee probably just needs a little bit more wordsmithing.
Well, we could report and refer it to appropriation.
Yeah, it's gotta go up to appropriation.
All right, so,
I so move.
Second.
so that is a motion to report and amend, as amended and refer to.
Yes, sir.
House Committee on Appropriations, all right? Anyone on the committee wishing to vote on that motion, please do so on the electronic voting board. Thank you, Delegate Sickles.
Thank you very much for your consideration, and everybody knows this is a problem, and we can, I think we're up to the task.
If you weren't here when we said this is a subcommittee of the courts, a subcommittee.
Yeah.
So we got 3 attorneys. Yeah, we'll have to start this one. That's when you're going to start.
Okay. So,
Add an extra hour, Dave's on the committee.
we are going to hear
And I'll do Jones still.
Delegate Jones and Delegate Cole's bill last, and those members are
Taking
taking
this thing price.
And
Right. Delegate
Delegate
Price.
Bowers, he said. So he sees you.
Please, welcome. Tell us about your bill and why we need it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. When it was announced that the winner of the 94th House District was going to be determined by drawing a name out of a bowl, there was, of course, instant reaction, not only just in Newport News, but across the Commonwealth. I received direct contact through social media and from people walking up to me in the store, everywhere I went, all walks of life, and they were upset about the proposed process, that it did not respect their vote that they cast on November 7th. And this is prior to the actual drawing of a name. I worked with staff to see what we could do to fix it, and I believe HB 1581 would give the power back to the people in the case of a tie and a recount. It seems that other states handle it in one of 3 ways: having the legislature choose, drawing names, or runoff elections. And we found that drawing by lot was first mentioned in Virginia Code in 1785. And so there is more than 230 years ago. But not only that, that there is a rarity in ties occurring in recount, the last one happening before I was even born. HB.
Which is, what, 29 years ago, wasn't it?
71. But yes, I'll accept that. If we do that. HB 1581, I think, takes into account the feelings of disenfranchisement amongst the more than 23,000 voters in the 94th district, and it would serve as a fix. The special election would allow for the decision to lie not with luck, and of course not with us as elected leaders, but with the people. And I would like to be very clear for the record, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, this is about more than the past election. This is definitely not about the outcome of the last election, but this is for me about the voting process moving forward for all elections, and really respecting the voices and votes of citizens as they choose their representation. And addressing concerns, if there was an amendment that had a specific timeline, I would be amenable to that. But when we discussed that, promptly was the way that we went about it, because we didn't want to constrain localities that may have needed a little bit more time to prepare for a special election. So that's why we didn't put an exact time limit on it, but hoping that promptly would, of course, be before session started, if it was for, or whenever the body was to reconvene.
Thank you. Just a comment, this is my lawyer bias coming out of it. You have a process, you kind of fight it out, which an election is, unfortunately, sometimes a fight, and then you want finality. You don't want to rehash the whole thing all over again. So, but I'll open up the floor to committee members who may have questions.
Delegate Price, one of the questions I have and a concern with the legislation is, if you go the route actually seating potentially a member of the House or Senate, and actually having that district represented in the General Assembly. As you know, the Constitution is very specific. We have to meet in a specific time frame. We cannot change that. And with what occurred basically in this past fall's election, you could potentially have somebody not even being seated until halfway through the General Assembly. That's the concern I've got with the direction you're trying to go. I understand the concerns, but I think we also have a duty, and the Constitution requires that the people be represented.
Mr. Chair, and that's what I was saying, like, I would be amenable if there was an amendment that set out a specific time frame. We were trying to allow for some flexibility for smaller towns, or, but with the understanding that it would be before that body met.
Difficult.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
yeah,
Cole.
Just a comment on that. I share Delegate Landis's concerns about that, and just, I mean, it would be impossible in the case of a General Assembly, because by the time, you've got the election in November, all right, you do the canvass, it's close, so you do a recount, and it comes up tied. By the time you go through that, I mean, the earliest, and I think it's probably optimistic, you're gonna have, because the registrars and everybody need time to prepare for a special election, it would be half over before, a session would be half over before you could do the special election. And then, what if that special election ended in a tie? What do you do then? Another special election? I mean, so I understand what you're trying to do, and of course, nobody likes drawing a name out of a hat to decide an election, but I'm not sure that this is the way to do it.
Delegate review.
Yeah, a couple comments. I'm not trying to pile on. I agree with what these delegates said. I also think it's worth pointing out, remember, this doesn't just apply to House delegates and Senate elections. Your town elections, your sheriffs, your clerks, everybody. You really could have, the more likely ties are in the town of Rich Creek and places like that. We have a much smaller gross number, and you could have a non-functioning local government in some of these places if you delay past the deadline. I think that's very important. I also think recounts special elections are very, very expensive. Having participated in one and having seen what it costs my localities, I think that's very, very expensive. We obviously have an issue of how we're gonna handle these elections. I think the Simon bill, which you've already reported out, does enough to fix the problem. The delay and expense that this bill creates, it makes the situation not enough better to justify that delay and expense. I think we do enough advancing the ball in the Simon bill. So I don't support this bill. I do support fixing the problem, which I think we've done in the earlier bill.
Mr. Chair, I would just say that it was fixing a different problem. So I'm bringing this bill on behalf of citizens that express concern about disenfranchisement. And so if we don't fix the part about the name being drawn, then I do not bring back to them a solution. And so I definitely see the writing on the wall where we're headed, don't want to belabor it, but I would like to, in the meantime, have the conversation about how do we give the people the ultimate voice in their representation.
Ms. Chairman, if I may. In the tie election, the House delegates were 14,000 people voted one way, 14,000 people voted the other way. To draw a lot arguably disenfranchises 14,000. To hold a recount disenfranchises 80,000 who will be unrepresented during the General Assembly session. So either way you choose, somebody for some period of time will feel disenfranchised. I would rather disenfranchise 14,000 over 80,000 and not spend the money in the same process doing it. So it's a legit issue. I appreciate you doing it. And if there was a way to do a snap recount election that happened in a day that didn't cost money, it'd be a different conversation. I just think you ultimately actually disenfranchise more people by your bill than you actually help.
Delegate Lindsay.
I wasn't gonna speak to it because I saw the handwriting on the wall, but I do disagree with his math. And I'll tell you why, 2 reasons. Number one, what we're talking about here is not as it relates to one small town, one city, or even one legislative district. We're talking about the integrity of the vote and the one man, one vote as it relates to all voters. So this really sends a different message, which is that we're going to allow for your vote to have meaning. The other thing I'd say is, just very briefly, is this. When you're talking about a situation of a tie, the fact that we've only had 3 that I can recall since I've been born, and I'm a little bit older than you are.
You're 39, right?
You know, we're not, so when we start talking about cost, we're not talking about something that's gonna happen all that often. It may not happen again for another 100 years. So when we start talking about the numbers, and as it relates to this question about disenfranchisement, when you're looking at this as an academic argument, a lot of what we're saying, you know, has weight. But when you're looking at it as one of the people who says, you mean that I got up at 7 o'clock and I went and voted, and now it's gonna be done, you know, out of the hat, to not do anything is what is going to tamp down voter enthusiasm. I'm sorry, that's it.
Well, my response would be, someone who voted, who passed away, who can't vote next election, or the Navy SEAL who's hiding out in Iraq and Afghanistan, can't vote now because you ordered a special election within 15, 20 days. He can't vote now, or she, the case may be. So we'll never agree on that issue, but I think there are valid arguments on both sides, and I side with Doug and Aviv on this. But does anyone else in the audience, does anyone in the audience wish to speak for or against this bill?
Deborah Wheeler, Vice Chair of the State Board of Elections. The cost concerns are very high to run a special election, mean for any kind of locality, whether it's a town election or a district election or whatever, Virginia, doesn't matter. You have to staff all of the precincts as if it's full court press. That's huge. The registrars will tell you that they have to have time to, because the code demands time to send out absentee balloting. So you've got to factor that amount of time. So you've got time delay. You have to certify the first election before you can go to a recount or have a special election, time delay, and we're back to the middle of the General Assembly in which people are not represented. We almost had this last year in the special elections on January the 10th, compounded by a snowstorm. So I would offer that as much as drawing a name out of some conveyance seems to trivialize an election, we have to deal with what's practical and the point of who votes in the special election. You know, we have an election on November, whatever the regular general election is, and people had the opportunity to come out and vote. No one was disenfranchised. And I would quote Judge Ellis, Federal Court Circuit Eastern District. You gotta be careful how you use that word. His words, not mine. People vote. Who do you determine can vote in a special election that's a re-election of the previous election? Is it only the same people who voted the first time? Or is it all those people who didn't get out of bed at 7 o'clock in the morning and go and vote the first time? Or before redo. I mean, this is, I think you have to weigh all of these.
All right, so we're.
I have a motion.
All right, yes, sir.
I would move that we pass by indefinitely House Bill 1581.
Well, all right, I'll borrow a comment from Dylan and B. We always give the patron last word, especially when it appears that we're gonna take negative action, so go ahead, Dylan Price.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate consideration, and I would again like to say that I look forward to having this conversation because I will be bringing this bill back forward because ultimately we have not solved the problem, especially with the concerns, I think, with disenfranchisement of more than 23,000 people that were voting, and then also within respecting the rarity of the event and also respecting the cost of the event. There is also a cost when people walk away from participating in their election process feeling like their vote did not matter.
Thank you, Dylan Price. Okay, so we have a motion that's been passed by indefinitely, that's been made and properly seconded. All those on the committee wish to cast their vote on this that motion, please do so on the electronic voting machine. Okay. All right, the motion carries on a vote of 4 to 2.
Thank you.
Okay, is Delegate Filer here? Okay, great. Thank you. Please tell us what your bill does.
Yes, and I apologize. I asked that someone move to strike a portion of the bill. The italicized text on line 115 and it starts with only those questions and ending on line 116 before the recount count
Okay,
court.
so I think that would actually probably be an amendment that we would have to move.
So Meg, she's just striking the italicized words on 115 and 116.
Yeah. Just to clarify, you wanted to strike, so the court shall rule on the validity of all question ballots, you're gonna strike the properly before it, and then also the full sentence?
Just the full sentence, only those question ballots.
Okay, we'll make that amendment in 2 places, because this is a section that's set out twice, but it'll be the same amendment, just on different lines. The other sentence is found on lines, 241 and 242.
Thank you. I'm a little slower than most, so.
So on lines 115, the sentence beginning only, we'll strike that entire sentence through being the 116, the new sentence, only those question ballots.
Okay.
And then make the same amendment on lines 241 and 242.
Better name.
Act serious, like you're working. That'd be fierce.
Teacher put it on.
I'm sorry, 241, 242, where am I?
The sentence that says only those question ballots whose validity was challenged during the recount of the precinct shall be properly before the recount court. We're striking that sentence in 2 places.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, all right, so someone like to move those amendments?
So moved.
Second, sorry. No, I was trying to find, I was getting.
All those in favor of the amended bill amendments, please say aye. Opposed, same sign. The amendments are properly before us. Could you, I read the bill before the amendment, so if you explain for the committee what the bill does and then what the amendment undoes.
So this bill will help as it relates to recounts in our Commonwealth. It will bring clarity regardless of party or candidate. Recounts in any race can find any one of our colleagues on either side, and we just want to ensure the best clear outcome is given to both candidates. Taking note of the question ballots and acting on them in a timely manner will help inoculate concerns about ballot security, and the bill will create a clear line of action for the process of contested ballots in a recount. So I believe the code being unclear causes confusion, which prolonged District 94's conclusion. So the code itself, the way it's written, causes confusion, which prolonged in District 94 the conclusion. Delegate Yancey could have had a clear answer and gotten to work versus waiting on the court. Thank you. Challenges to conclude. So essentially, it just brings a little bit of clarity to action moving forward. That way there wouldn't be back and forth of the court cases like we had in District 94. It would have been concluded sooner, so.
Okay. Any questions by the committee?
I have a question. How would it have been concluded sooner? Because and most people misunderstand what a recount is. Recount is a court process. The counting is only part of the recount. The recount starts when the court enters its first order and ends when the court enters its final order. You're talking about an anecdote, which is the specific experience of the 94th. That recount was gonna end on the second day when the court enters order, no matter what happened. So how was that delayed by what happened in that particular case?
Just the possibility, the possibility of the challenges in the court and the issues that happened after it concluded. So it would have just brought clarity, and in the future, I think either side wouldn't have that opportunity to even have that opening to go to court or have to wait on a not wait on a ruling because it was certified, but just to have that happen.
Follow up.
I mean, again, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding of the public and what happened, how recounts work. Nobody went to court. It is a court proceeding. It was a 2-day scheduled court proceeding. It was always going to do exactly what it did. You were always going to have a result on the second day when the court entered its order. Now, I suppose there was a 12-hour window of uncertainty for people between the moment they went to bed, the first day of the recount, and the moment the court ruled on the second day of the recount. But there was no subsequent court action, there were no motions filed, there was no nothing. It was just a normal recount. I understand what you're saying, which is that the moment the specific count of a precinct is done, you ought to identify ballots and nothing else should be questioned. I think that's a legitimate debate to have. I don't think it's right to say that the way that one went or the way this bill would go would shorten the time frame, bring any more certainty or anything else. It ends when the judges say it's over, which is what they did then. And what they would still do under your bill would just put a box around what the judges consider when the judges actually do their make their ruling. That's all.
Bill Cole, you had a question?
No, I'm just not sure. All right, basically my understanding is the way the process worked is you go through, you've got a recount, you go through the process of the recount, and you come up with your preliminary numbers that goes to the judge. And then, the judge either accepts or, accepts, the judge has discretion, some discretion there, whether to accept the results or say, no, I don't think this ballot's good, I think that one's good. And I think what her bill does is basically takes away that discretion of the judge. And I'm not sure that's a good idea. I think that could disenfranchise voters.
That's kind of where I was gonna go with it. Adele, you want to?
I don't know that it ties the judge's hands. I saw it more in line with I'm saying this, with what Delegate Habib was saying, and that it encapsulates what issues are gonna be considered, or what ballots are gonna be subject to consideration. And as I see it, it's more about, let's look at what the recount found. Let's then have those be the issues that are being addressed before the court, because those were the issues that the persons who conducted the recount said, this is our determination. Let's not have, for lack of a better term, extraneous information then imparted to the court, and that being part of the more expansive consideration. So whatever the will of the body is, or this committee is the will of this committee, but I see that as the difference in what's being said and what's being.
So I have a question. So when the ballots are being gone through one by one, we don't have lawyers or not, someone may be advised by lawyers, but lawyers are not going through each one of those ballots.
Correct.
So the person going through the ballot does not recognize the legal significance of putting a question mark around it, and the importance of preserving that ability to argue a matter in front of a judge. And then we're taking discretion away from the judge. So unless we're gonna appoint lawyers to scrutinize every single ballot, and know that what they're doing there is going to impact the ability of a voter to cast a vote to have that vote count, we're not helping the voters, I think, by trying to shrink that box.
What's gonna happen is, at the end of the count of each precinct, you're gonna say, I hereby challenge every single ballot. And then every single ballot's before the court. And so you're just gonna get around, every lawyer's gonna get around this attempt, which I get the attempt, which is to put a box around it. You're just gonna have a giant box around every ballot. Because anybody who didn't do that would be committing election malpractice, to just say, I challenge every ballot.
May I? So I think it already says that, either side can, the written statement of any one recount official challenging a ballot shall be sufficient to require its submission. So, it could still happen where either side can challenge every ballot. Yeah, it's already there.
You can challenge every ballot.
So, and they don't, I don't think they did in the cases that we've looked at or talked about, but, so they already could, it just makes it so that they have to that both sides are clear that there's a time frame and a window, and not just kind of waiting for the judges to just say, and who throws in the last. It's like, everybody, if you have a question, we do it now.
Does anyone in the audience wish to speak for or against it? Yes, sir.
My name is Joseph A. McClung, Ridge Creek, Virginia. This recount procedure question about what is really the problem? It's the ballot. Why don't you make a ballot that is not questionable? It's black and white. If it rains on my hand, it's raining. Okay? when you make a ballot where it's questionable, you're gonna have ties and all this controversy, spending everybody's money and everybody else's money outside this room. So to solve this question about this, why don't we just make a ballot that is very simple, foolproof, fail-safe, where it's not questioned. In other words, if a person marks both candidates as excellent, you throw that ballot in the trash. I mean, some of the responsibility on these ballots lies in the people who fills them out. Matter of fact, all of it does. Not part of it, all of it. So why don't you make a ballot that is so simple that a first grader can use it? And that's just what, and you wouldn't have this question here. Just make a ballot that is foolproof. It's black and white. Are you for this person or are you against this person? That's it.
Anyone else who wishes to speak in favor or against this bill? Okay, all right.
Mr. Chairman, a motion. I move that we pass by indefinitely House Bill 1589.
Second.
Okay. Delegate, last word.
I guess I just wanna say thank you for examining the bill. I do think without the language, the only difference is that it can be, ballots can be challenged. There's no final moment where the ballots are not examined anymore, and up until and no one knows when the judges are going to officially sign. So it just would bring clarity, that's all. I don't think it does anything but just put that limit on it and make sure both sides know the limit.
Okay. Don't question your intentions. So we have a motion on the table to pass the bill by indefinitely. Properly seconded. All those who wish to vote on the measure or the motion, please cast your vote on the top of the board. Okay, the motion passes on a vote of 4-2. So now we're down to committee. Those are going to present bills. Committee. And we will go with Chairman Cole first.
Thanks, Todd.
We have 8 minutes.
All right, yeah. This is a bill that we've seen before. Basically, I know that historically, after every redistricting, the General Assembly, and this is true whether it was run by Democrats or Republicans, the General Assembly makes technical adjustments after redistricting to fix split precincts and things like that. My House Bill 158, what it would do is it would place limitations on what the General Assembly could do when it makes those changes. There were concerns about what was done in the Senate several years ago when the Senate tried to totally redo redistricting under the guise of a technical adjustments bill. This would prevent that. It would say that you can only make technical adjustments to districts after redistricting in order to reduce split precincts, and it still has to be within the margin of error that was specified during redistricting. So in our case, you couldn't make more than a 1% change in a district. And again, you can only make those changes to reduce split precincts. I think it's a reasonable bill. If we had had this, we wouldn't have had the Fredericksburg fiasco. And so I hope it will be there's no partisan effort in this. And I hope that, I think it's a good policy and should go forward.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in opposition to this measure?
Good morning. I'm Lauren Schmidt. I'm the Deputy Legislative Director for the administration, and we do oppose this bill. There's questions about the constitutionality. We believe that the Constitution sets out that redistricting is done in 2011 and every 10 years after. So we would ask that you oppose this bill.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Yes. To the administration. Did Governor Northam believe the bill was unconstitutional in 2011 when he voted for it?
I do not have the answer to that.
Okay, could you get that answer? Because I'd be curious to hear if he voted for an unconstitutional bill, or if he believes the Constitution has changed, or if he's gotten different advice than he had back then when he voted for these bills. That'd be great. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak in opposition to the bill? Okay. All right. I'm not going to let those who want to speak in favor of it speak. If we take an action contrary to that view, then we'll bring the bill back up and hear from these folks. So
I'd just like to respond to that constitutional concern. there is nothing in the Constitution that prohibits the changing of districts anytime. This legislation would, by code, limit it. Right now, there is nothing in the Constitution. The Constitution just says we have to do redistricting every 10 years. It doesn't say we can't change districts in the intermediate time. And so right now, as the code is, it's wide open. You know, we could, if we wanted to, redo redistricting right now. There's no prohibition on that unless you pass this bill.
Mr. Chairman, I've been here a while. And it amazes me that the administration's making that argument. Then Senator Northam, through the legislative process, and all of us for years have always made technical changes to the redistricting boundaries, again, within the criteria that the General Assembly agreed to. We have to do that because localities determine the precinct lines after we've done redistricting. So to make that argument, and because as a practice, the General Assembly has done it probably for, I don't know, however
Decades,
long
yeah.
the redistricting process, you know, nobody's ever raised the constitutional question that I'm aware of. I just find that ridiculous.
Chair, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, a motion.
Do you want any input from the Democrats, or?
Well, I asked for those who opposed to the bill, but yeah, Elliot Lindsay, if you want to.
Long story short, and we look at handwritings on the wall. This is the same bill in the same format as was presented by Chairman Cole last year. At that time, we winded up, through a bipartisan split, 14-7 P&E, then getting, into the House and 62-33 in terms of the vote then. If this was a group that the citizens trusted to have the interests of the electorate ahead of the interests of political, I'm trying to use a nice word, political advantage versus disadvantage, then it probably would engender more confidence by the voters. This particular bill, if applied inappropriately by whomever may be in power, whoever may have had the greater number of votes, can impact elections and I'm not talking about on a general scope, but it can impact elections just simply, even if you look at the situation as it just happened in Fredericksburg, while it could have corrected some of the issues, it could have also tilted the table, dramatically to prejudge the issues, and that's the concern. And as to the point, and I certainly don't put myself in the position of speaking for the administration, but if you look at how now Governor Norman, I'm sorry, no, what's his name? Northam. If you look at, yeah, no, I don't. If you look at how now Governor Northam voted when then Senator Northam, I'm having a difficult time to that, and I've been fighting a cold. I'll just simply say I've seen some Republican governors change their votes when governor from how they voted when they were either a delegate or a senator. So I'll just submit it on that basis.
Second.
All right, all those who wish to vote on reporting this bill, recommending reporting to the full committee, please cast your vote on the electronic voting machine. Motion carries on a vote of 4-2. Last bill from Chairman Jones, and I believe Dylan.
Chairman, I've got Chairman Jones 767. This law was passed a decade ago. Senator Howell had this bill. There's nothing partisan about this bill. There's nothing about changing lines. The only thing this says is that they can't change the precincts in a window that surrounds the census block, the census window, which is very important. It also cleans up a Voting Rights Act reference that's no longer relevant. So I hope we'll look favorably on this bill and advance it.
Any questions from the committee? Anybody from the public or the audience wish to speak for or against this measure? Okay, Chair, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to report. Second.
Okay, wishing to vote on ordinance bill to full committee, please do so on electronic ballot.
I reserve the right to change my vote at full committee, but for purposes of advancing it, I'm voting in favor of it right now.
Remember, it's not my bill, it's Chairman Jones's bill.
Yeah, that's why I'm voting in favor of it.